Hi, everybody. This is the Best Games Period, the podcast where we talk every week about a new game that may or may not be one of the best games, period. I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and with me is the ever burb-loving Naomi Lugo.
Burp, burp. You guys missed my burp noises earlier.
Well,
I suppose they weren't technically birds.
You can give air horn noises. Yeah.
I can't even remember what I did now.
Give it your best shot.
I seriously can't even. That definitely wasn't it, but that's a bird for you guys.
Was it a bird? Was it
like a crow?
I don't think so.
There's definitely a bird that sounds like that out there.
Maybe if it's dying. Oh gosh, this is off to a great start.
Yep.
So I said this is the best games, period. I didn't say which episode it was because we're doing women and tropes, women and game and tropes, women and games and tropes. That's the name of this very special segment that we have decided to name that.
I thought it was like what pissed us off today or something like that.
That didn't roll off the tongue as well, and it didn't relate to like what we were talking about. We could do an entirely different show about.
Down.
I would be down doing an entirely different show about how
what pissed us off.
Yeah, just talking about things that we dislike.
I mean, yeah, but I would be able to talk forever.
Infinite content.
Yep.
Here, advertisers, get at what pissed us off today.
You want negativity associated with your product? We got you.
Yeah. But no, we're going to talk about the second video in the Tropes versus Women in Video Games series by Anita Sarkeesian, the woman that loves to make the internet mad. Or I should rephrase that as Anita Sarkeesian, the woman the internet loves to be mad at for no reason.
There we go. That's
so,
better.
There we go. Oh gosh, I took all of my notes like 4 weeks ago.
We are on a roll.
We are.
If you guys haven't yet, you need to go listen to our Mario Party episode because we are so focused and just driven and really excited to talk about Mario Kart. No, I'm totally kidding, by the way. Oh my
Mario
god.
Party.
Yep, see? That's about as much focusment as you can expect in that episode. So.
Also, just want to throw it out there that we're going to be recording this episode back to back with an episode on Overcooked, which if you really want to hear us on a roll, that's the show to catch us on. Gosh,
we are gems,
just precious gems.
So precious.
So to kick things off, let's start just with the words of wisdom that preface every single episode of the Tropes versus Women in Games series. It is both possible and even necessary to simultaneously enjoy a piece of media while also being critical of its more problematic or pernicious aspects.
Yes.
That means you can like things that have problems.
Indeed, Internet, it is possible. Just
And
because
even
someone says
necessary.
something negative about a video game doesn't mean that they think it's the worst thing in the planet. Like, it doesn't invalidate your opinions.
I'm pretty sure it does, and anyone who disagrees with me will die by my hand.
Internet 2018.
Internet discourse 2018, probably 2019, 2020, and every year beyond that.
And beyond. Internet beyond. But yeah, I mean, and you can sum up the second part of this series, or the second part of this first... Oh my gosh, what am I trying to say?
I don't know.
Part 2! The video that is freaking named Part 2. Come on, brain. There's a quote that Anita said over and over and over, and that's your wife is brutally murdered, then you have to rescue your daughter.
Yep. That summarizes this episode pretty good.
Yep. So what she's saying there, I mean, she's literally naming plots of different video games, but there's so many that follow that pattern that it becomes ridiculous.
I actually wrote down an entire list of different games that she mentions, and keep in mind that the series came out in 2013, so a lot of these are a little bit older, but still worth keeping in mind. Do you mind if I just read them off real quick?
Go for it.
And by real quick, I mean it'll take a little bit.
Because there's a lot of them.
Onimusha Warlords, The Bouncer, Time Splitters 2, Rygar, The Legendary Adventure, Kingdom Hearts, Maximo, Ghosts to Glory, I wrote Castlevania, but Castlevania, Harmony of Dissonance, Grabbed by the Ghoulies, Will Rock, Time Splitters Future Perfect, Resident Evil 4, Red Steel, Sonic the Hedgehog, Ninja Gaiden, Dragon Sword, Prince of Persia, The Two Thrones, Devil May Cry 4, Prototype, Ghostbusters the video game, Splatterhouse, Ninja Gaiden, Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2, Alan Wake, The Void, Child of Eden, Max Payne 3, Asura's Wrath, Deadlight, Hitman Absolution, Ninja Gaiden 2, and Alone in the Dark.
Mind you, those are just the games she listed, and as Jack said, this was recorded in 2013, so there's obviously been some games in between there, so that list is way more enormous than even that. So what we're talking about, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to do like the quickest recap of our last episode. Mm-hmm. Basically, her first video goes over the history of the damsel in distress trope, kind of where it comes from in literature and, the wider context of it, and how it became a recurring trope in video games throughout the 80s and early 90s, and where it kind of established itself as a fundamental building block of video games. And she also goes over why the damsel in distress trope is problematic, and what it communicates, and what it means in the world to have this be a fundamental story that we tell to each other over and over and over again. And the damsel in distress trope, just to do a quick recap, is a plot device. Female character is whisked away or placed in a dangerous situation from which she can't escape on her own, and then she must be rescued by a male character, and is usually used as the main incentive for the male protagonist's story. And that continues to be a thing even today. Over to you, Naomi.
So, and jumping into this next part of the same video. Why is that so confusing for me? It's just part 2 of this first video. And there's more videos after that, guys. I know, mind blown. But she just goes more in depth about the specific... Oh, what does she call them? Oh, cocktails that developers use and why they've been using them and why they are problematic. Because obviously there are, story tropes that a lot of people rely on. And we talked about this in the last episode. They're not necessarily bad, and they're not always lazy, but they definitely can be. But what Anita goes into more detail about is just what makes them misogynistic. And
it's basically the different things she is going into are ways that developers have discovered to basically have their cake and eat it too by not exactly having the explicit vanilla damsel in distress trope, because players have come to recognize it on site, and it has
been there, done that.
Yeah, it's basically become like this huge cliche and running joke, like, oh, your princess is another castle. Like, that is a recurring joke through all of video games, and developers know that, and so they're trying to still use the trope, but
spice it up.
Yeah, different spicy ways.
So, and what those spicy, quote, things are include things like, not only is your damsel in distress, but she might have been brutally murdered. Hooray! Or one that Anita specifically details is what she calls, and let me try to remember this, is the damsel, oh gosh, brain. It's the one where you have to put your damsel out of her misery, and she's literally asking
the mercy
for you to
killing.
do that. Mercy killing, yes, that one. So players are asked literally by these female characters to be put out of their misery because of reasons, and then that puts the agency into the man's hands into what should be done with this woman's life. So,
well, it's a way of kind of absolving the player of the guilt of killing this character, and B, sacrificing the importance of this character to empower the male character's narrative journey.
Yeah, and I mean, the root of what makes this toxic is that women become dehumanized just yet again, and they become tools for the men, literally. Tools for the developers to build the men's character up, or, you know, tools for their story, stuff like that. And the stories themselves are not about the women anymore.
Well, so a good... So there's a phrase that I think a lot of people are familiar with at this point. It's called the woman in refrigerator trope. And that basically originated with Gail Simone, who basically was naming this phenomenon of female comic book characters being killed off, or, you know, horribly brutalized via torture or sexual assault or rape, to basically move the male character's story forward. Like, it wasn't about the struggles those women went through, or their trauma, or really anything about them as a character. It was because they were useful for the male protagonist's story insofar as they could be brutalized in order to
make the man feel, or show the character, or show the audience that this man has deep feelings about this woman, and then it makes them, it moves their arc along. It's
not even feeling about the woman. It's entirely
entitlement to the woman.
Yes, it is the taking of a possession and desecrating it in some way that damages the honor of the male protagonist, who then has to reclaim that power by going on a revenge mission of some kind, to kind of restore honor and manliness and masculinity.
Yes. God of War being a perfect example.
Yes.
Meanwhile, we could look at God of War. Here, well, let's just dissect God of War for a second.
Okay.
So Kratos, he's a war machine, right? And yep. And to make a literal long story short, he ends up murdering his wife and child. And his child is a daughter, right? Or is it a son? I know he eventually has one or the other.
I don't know that it matters.
Yeah. So, and yeah, anyway, so he...
And so that brings up just an additional point I want to hit on. It doesn't matter who the characters are that are involved. I don't think we really know anything about Kratos, like his wife or child, except that they are his wife and child, and that they were killed and he murdered them and he feels bad about it. And
we could have gone in so many different directions about how Kratos would feel about that, right? But instead, catering towards a more simplistic and time-honored tradition of catering to a male violent fantasy, Kratos believes that he is owed revenge, and he can do anything and will do anything to get that revenge. Not really looking at A, what he has done, B, how he is getting this revenge and what that means to other. Granted, he's brutalizing gods, but still, you know, there are morals out there, and they could have been dealt with in a different way. And then, see, he ends up, you know, having sex with other females throughout the series, and that kind of negates his whole righteous passion for having, you know, been tricked to kill his wife and child. But, I mean that's
I think what you're bringing up is part of, not part of the problem. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like the trope itself doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the male character's journey. It is like, I think you can have a high quality narrative that really resonates with people that uses these tropes, but I think ultimately the problem with the trope, it doesn't have anything to do with the male character per se. It's
a projection. It's a projection of what we have come to expect as a society, and that's been just regurgitated over and over and over.
Yeah, I'm not phrasing myself right, so I need to start over. It is a bad reflection on the character, showing that they have a sense of ownership over their partner or spouse or, you know, whatever, someone who isn't themselves, that they in a healthy world probably shouldn't have. In a healthy world, Kratos would mourn his wife and child and maybe focus on bettering himself so that he's not just a rage-filled killing machine. Instead, he has to go on that violent killing quest where he just decimates the gods themselves.
Yeah, and that's why the 2018 God of War was so brilliant. It acknowledged the character that they built. They acknowledged that toxicity, and they did a great job of kind of deconstructing that with his son. You know, his son starts to show these violent tendencies, and Kratos is forced to reflect on himself because he obviously wants, or he's not perfect by any means, but he still wants his son to, and that's tough.
Not he at least
him. Wants his, yeah. We'll put it very basically like that. He at least wants his son to not just be a war machine, blind war machine like he was, because he finally saw some error in his ways as an older man. And you can see it in his very, very sad, angry eyes.
Yeah, and I would also say that maybe it's not the best thing that the new God of War kicks off with a woman we don't know dying, and that being the thing that spurs all of the narrative in God of War.
And again, like we said in the beginning, like Anita Sarkeesian prefaces at the beginning of every single episode, we can still like media, but find faults in it.
Right.
God of War was disappointing in its lack of representation of women. And the one woman we got, she...
is a seductress.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's not necessarily a seductress, I wouldn't say. I would say she's also blinded by her own rage, and she's centered... her whole decisions in her life is centered around male characters, like be it her son or, Thor.
I do think that the game frames her a little bit as a seductress type of character, even if she herself isn't, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, like that's her reputation, but she's not portrayed that way. Yeah. So... Yeah.
Well, so we have that all of that conversation is just one incarnation of the damsel in distress trope. And you could even apply that more broadly to the new God of War, where the main point of the journey is laying the woman to rest on the mountaintop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I like there are different kinds of distress that aren't necessarily locked in a cage and weeping as like a villain with demonic horns like laughs maniacally.
Yeah.
I think that's something that's important to realize too.
Oh yeah, for sure, because then we get kind of the opposite effect. Or not necessarily the opposite effect, but the women who are brutalized, murdered, or, even in the case of God of War, are, they're dead. We have the tendency to project what we think women should be onto them. And if they're not that projection, if they're not pure, beautiful, wholesome, kind, then they're not worthy of being saved, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happens with Freya, is that she's not pure. She's perceived as, being tainted in different senses. So she's not as exalted as the mother character is.
Or even looking back at the older God of War series with the prostitutes. Mm-hmm. They're not considered clean. They're considered disposable. Or that infamous scene of Kratos, like, ripping apart a harpy to hold open a door. Do you remember that? I think it was
vaguely.
In God of War Ascension, the handheld one.
Probably not then. I don't think I played that one.
Well, so we have that one. I think probably one of the more interesting incarnations of this trope, precisely because it attempts to subvert it in such a way that it makes you like, if you're not paying attention, it can really trick you into forgetting its presence. Is the damsel in distress who becomes empowered at some point, and that one moment of empowerment is sort of used as an attempt to hand wave away the trope in a sense. So
it's like, look, she's not completely useless. That makes it okay.
Like the example given in the video, and I think it's a really, really good one, is from the game Ico. And Ico is, like, I think it's a fantastic and beautiful and amazing game, but definitely one of the aspects of it that has always rubbed me the wrong way is the treatment of supporting character Yorda, the princess who's locked away with Aiko on this in this strange ruin structure. And it isn't until the very end, after you've had to babysit her throughout the entire game, that she is able to call upon some kind of power and save Aiko. And that's interesting, but ultimately, it doesn't absolve the game of using the trope as its like main gameplay mechanic.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, something to chew over in your brains.
Yeah, and I mean, we're almost at the point where, we're drawing to a close, so I just want
to
make sure...
I have so many more notes.
At least a reasonable one, because I know we could talk forever, right? But I just want to make sure that we hit the point of why these things are a problem. And one of the points that she makes is that this helplessness and imbalance of power between male and female characters is deemed as desirable. And when a man is placed, like the women are placed in his faculty, they become his property. And I mean, I get it. Human nature would be like, oh, I have power over this being. That makes me stronger. That makes me better.
Or maybe another way of framing it is like the caretaker. Like the man has the responsibility over this woman. And if you stop to think about it, the woman can make her own decisions.
Yeah, it's incredibly dehumanizing. And it's something that affects us every single day. Like, it's what makes it more likely. And like you said, it can be insidious. And it makes it more likely for a male colleague to be disrespectful towards a woman and not even realize it. And I mean disrespectful in mansplaining, And that's even more frustrating. Okay, not necessarily. That's not true. It is incredibly frustrating to not be able to explain why mansplaining is not okay, is because a lot of people don't know that they're doing it. And they don't understand why that is taking place. And it's because a lot of the time, men don't necessarily respect the knowledge base, the reputation, the careers of their women colleagues. They think that they are superior to them. And it's driven home by the media and things like these games, is they are placed over these women characters. They are exalted above them. Women are weak and powerless, and it is up to the men to come in and save them. And a version of them coming in to save them is to, help this poor little child understand about this topic, right? And it happens commonly in video games.
This poor little child who's 30 years old.
Yeah, who has been working in video games for how long? Who has put out how much media? But it's up to the man to come in and rescue them with their knowledge. And obviously their knowledge base is better because they are a man. And that is how media has taught them. And it is very, very powerful because it is so sly. Like, a lot of men who I've confronted about mansplaining, it is a difficult freaking process. And it is a process because they are taught that, that's just how things are. And they don't helpful. Understand that perspective. Yeah. And of course, they think that the woman who is getting frustrated about that, they think that they're just being ungrateful, or that they don't understand that they're trying to be helpful. And then it just becomes this big problem because you can't even see the problem in front of your face that you are perpetrating. So
and that's that
yes.
actually rolls into a surprising number of the permutations that Sarkeesian brings up in this second part of her video. Like with Mercy killing a damsel, or another permutation of that with a damsel becoming some kind of monster that must be put down or too hideous to live or something like that. The killing of the damsel is then portrayed as an altruistic act. And that's part of the thing about video games is that the protagonist is almost always shown as the virtuous one in this pairing between damsel and protagonist. It's all, I shouldn't say always, but one thing that is interesting and that you can do if you're kind of wondering about this, you can do this from the comfort of your own home. Think back to all of the women who have died to kickstart a male protagonist's journey, whether it's God of War, Max Payne, Shadow of Mordor, etc. The list goes on. Now try and think of how many men have been killed in video games to kickstart a female protagonist's journey. And I'm gonna guess that you're gonna have a much harder time thinking of those games. I'm sure there might be one or two out there, but they are incredible exceptions to the rule. And that's because the power dynamic of the trope favors men, and that's kind of what makes it toxic when it's repeated over and over and over again. It's essentially the female character being disempowered to empower the male character. And
if it is a male being killed, a lot of the times they will portray a feminine characteristic, like,
okay, they're gay.
Yeah, or they're a young child and they have not learned how to be a man yet. They have some sort of weakness that justifies it, and it's oftentimes a feminine characteristic. Or yeah, they're gay, and we can't have that.
And one of the things, or villains, you'll see that a lot in villains.
Yes, villains.
They're not as manly. And I think one of the things you were talking about a little while ago about mansplaining in particular relates to a quote that I actually wrote down from the video. One of the really insidious things about systemic and institutional sexism is that most often regressive attitudes and harmful gender stereotypes are maintained and perpetuated unintentionally. And that's why, people have to sit down and really do a lot of introspection if you really want to be sure that you're not perpetuating those stereotypes. I know I have a lot of internalized things that I need to work on. I'm by no means perfect on any of these accounts either, and I also sometimes either miss or gloss over some harmful tropes in games and other media too. So
yeah, I mean, none of us are perfect at all.
Well, just like games, it's okay to like people and also acknowledge that things could be better. It's okay to like yourself and acknowledge that you could be better.
Yeah, and I really think that it is an act of love to call people out on that kind of thing and help them be better. And I don't mean that fixing people. I mean that really taking the time to try to understand where they're coming from in a way, and not understand their point of view, but understand how they came to that place, and then help them understand what they can do better to be better, because that takes so much work. It really does. Not only can they get defensive, but they are literally conditioned. It is literally just pathways in their brains that they have to deconstruct, and it takes a lot of work to do that. And that's why people on the internet ask people to call out their own family members, you know, when they do horrible things that are sexist, racist, all of the above. It's because it takes a lot of time for people to do that, you know, and it can't all be on the weight of the, you know, I don't want to say victim. What's another word? Perpetratee.
The person acted upon.
Yes, the people who have been, you know, who have already gone through this. They've already gone through this trauma. They don't need to also fix the problem. It's up to the people who are perpetrating it to fix the problem.
And I think, so I think that there are two things, and these general points are kind of reinforced by the end of part 2 of the video series. But violence against women is a problem all around the world, and part of the feminist outlook on that violence, and I think this is something that a lot of people who aren't super knowledgeable or up on their feminist critiques might not necessarily think about, but feminism also includes men. And so violence against women is a huge problem, but that doesn't mean feminism doesn't also care about violence against men. And most often violence against men occurs because men aren't conforming to the proper, powerful masculine stereotype.
Yeah. And I mean, even small examples, sorry to interrupt you, but
that's fine.
When there was the firing of Jessica Price, and I can't remember the studio, the woman who was basically fired over a tweet, her male counterpart who came to her side was punished immediately. And I do believe that that is systemic of him actually going and supporting her versus just going along with the system. Like, he stepped up and he was punished just like his female counterpart was. Yep. It goes in so many different ways. It doesn't always have to be extreme. And I think that is really important to drive home, is that, yes, of course, like this kind of attitude lends itself to horrific acts being perpetrated against women, but it's also everyday things.
Right. And, like, I think that's something that's really important to acknowledge, that we live in a world that isn't binary. There's an entire spectrum of a lot of different things, but one of those things includes a spectrum of how we think of men and women and everyone in between. Like, some people have incredibly toxic views on women. They'll have entire forums dedicated to how women refuse to sleep with them, and how women are a plague upon humanity. And then you also have men who just have a tendency to mansplain or crack a sexist joke here and there. And both of those stem from an underlying sexist attitude that should probably be examined and confronted, but they're both very different. They're both very different in terms of intensity, but they're still both problems.
Yes. So and the underlying point is that these attitudes that are perpetrated through the damsel in distress, they lead to a spectrum of problems. And of course, it's not caused by video games. No. It's a symptom of it.
Well, it's caused by wider culture, because remember, in the first episode, the damsel in distress trope is by no means exclusive to video games. We talk about it in video games because that's kind of our thing.
That's our expertise.
You can find it in movies and books and even in the narratives on the news.
Just go listen to the radio.
Yeah.
Listen to freaking disc jockeys on popular radio stations. It is absolutely prevalent there.
I would rather not.
Before I go on a tangent, like seriously, they're a forum that radio is most consistently a forum that has been perpetrating these sexist attitudes through their disc jockeys, and it is infuriating, but I'll save that for another day.
Okay. I look forward to your disc jockey manifesto.
Oh, okay. Before I go on a tangent. Oh my God.
I do think that one of the possibly the most damning parts of Sarkeesian's second video is pointing out that the progress that games have made, at least from the 80s and early 90s on until 2013, the main progress in telling the damsel in distress trope is that the damsel has gone from being kidnapped to being dead.
Yep.
And that is, when you start thinking about it, both incredibly dark and it's accurate.
It's not a direction we want to go in. That's
all in the name of being ever edgier and
making a little bit more money.
Yeah. I mean, and like, I don't even know that game designers would frame it that way, but it became the sexiest and edgiest option of reframing kind of these older familiar tropes to get people on board while having the female characters still fulfill the trope. Because honestly, again, one of the most insidious parts of the trope is it, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the female character is alive or dead, because either way she's still the property of the male protagonist in some way, or is viewed as such. You can do that. I'll just edit this part out.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, we can still keep recording. We're good.
Yeah. Okay. But that's all I was gonna say.
Okay.
Final thoughts?
Just that
Disc
the rhetoric online,
evil.
The rhetoric online is we poke fun at it all the time because it is ridiculous, but it is really, it's the barrier that prevents us from making progress on these types of things. Like right now, if I were to tweet out that video game, like I'll say God of War perpetrated violence against women and was a lazy, something subversive about a specific beloved video game that implies misogyny and sexism, I would get backlash. Or I guess, depending on the scope of who was able to see it, there would be backlash on that. And that, I don't know how we tackle that except for things like this where we have discourse about it. And I know that it's going to keep on coming up throughout this series. And it's because Sarkeesian was directly linked with Gamergate, and Gamergate was just this big monstrosity of how these ideas have manifested. There was an absolutely violent reaction to trying to protect these ideals and keep them safe for whatever reason, to keep the status quo in place, to keep women subjugated. Go ahead.
I would argue it's an extension of the trope itself. Like
women shouldn't speak out. They should just be like what they are in video games.
It's not even that. It is that at the heart of it, for men, and why the damsel in distress spurs the hero's journey so often, it's because the main character's masculinity has been threatened in some way. And that's either by disempowering them, by taking something they consider theirs, like their girlfriend or their wife or their daughter or something like that. And that carries over into the real world with ramifications that some people internalize. And so those people consider that anything that might disempower them in some way makes them less masculine. And that can't be abided if you are priding yourself on how masculine you are. And that's like a way you define yourself. And so for a lot of people, that criticism, and by people I mean men, for a lot of men, that criticism becomes an issue of not just video games, but who they are as people and what they value about themselves. Yeah. And so it becomes this incredibly personal thing, and that's why you see such vitriolic backlash. And it's the kind of backlash where I think at the very bottom of it, they know it's not rational. They would never admit that if you engage them in a conversation. But I think it's the reason that to this day, you have people out there in the not just the gaming community, but in movies and comic books, railing against the concept of, we have all these women and minorities in things now, and that's bad.
SJW, blah, blah, blah.
SJW, blah, blah, blah. Most recently, it's been going on with Comicsgate. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh, yes.
But I was just reminded of this Twitter exchange I had earlier today, and it made me... I saw a tweet by Joseph Knoop, friend of the program, who's never appeared on the program. But he was tweeting about Comicsgate people and how in their ideal world, a villain would basically just be evil for no reason, because if you contextualize it, that gives it political connotations. Mm-hmm. And so my response to that was basically to observe that these people have created mechanisms where their ideal scenario is impossible. They claim that they want no politics in their media, in their games, in their comic books, and they just want things to be fun, or about cool spaceships, or about villains being villains and men being men and women being women. But the problem with that is they've just constructed something that ultimately doesn't work and makes you mad at everything. Because at the end of the day, even things like Star Wars have political connotations and undertones. I mean, the text of Star Wars is a band of rebels overthrowing an empire. And you can start breaking that down into, well, from the Empire's perspective, it's a band of terrorists trying to topple their very stable political system. And that, all of that winds up, basically all I'm trying to say is that they construct these mental mechanisms that set themselves up for failure and make them more and more angry at a system that they perceive to be making them less masculine. And with feminism, your masculinity isn't based upon any of those things, but they just, on a gut reactionary level, reject that entire notion, and in favor of being angry all the time. And honestly, that's scary.
Yeah, and because they're supported by a whole bunch of other men around them who are feeling the same thing, so then they feel justified in their feelings.
Well, and I think that's how we get, eventually, with further and further outrage and these mental mechanisms that continue to make people simmer at a near boiling point. Eventually, one of them boils over, and then we get something like Elliot Rodger going out and shooting a bunch of women because he wasn't getting sex. Like, or that other shooting that happened even more recently because of the same reason. Like, at the end of the day, it wasn't about sex. It was about feeling like a real man, TM, and that real masculine expectation is set by our culture, and that's why stuff like this matters and talking about it matters. Anyway, I've been talking a lot.
No worries, ma'am. It was wonderful points.
But again, video games don't cause this, but they are a part of it, and I feel like since they're in our wheelhouse, we can talk about it.
And we love them, so
yes,
we put in the work.
Yes, very much so. I've been playing a lot of Super Smash Brothers. And you know what? That's a game about positive masculinity, because it's about two bros smashing, and I don't know where I was going with that.
Porn.
And I think that's fine. You can still be masculine and smash your bros.
Yep.
Any other closing thoughts?
No. Just that the next episode will continue looking at the points that Sarkeesian brings up, and getting a little bit of this junk off our chest and into the world so that it can be managed, at least a little bit.
Heck yeah. How were we ending these?
I don't remember.
Give it your best ending shot.
Flippity tippity.
Okay.
Well, I mean, these episodes are recorded for our lovely Patreons.
That's true.
Patreons. Anyway, you lovely people who support us and believe in us enough to throw us money. All right, that sounds bad. To lovingly give us money each month, and we really do appreciate the support you give us. So we try to put together a little bit of extra content for you guys, and we really hope that you appreciate it and that you enjoy our conversations here. And if you have any content suggestions for us, we're always willing to listen, and we love hearing from you guys. And again, we really love that you support us, and we love our little community that we've created, and we wouldn't be here without you guys. So yeah. Sincerely thank you from both of us.
Well, and also tell your friends and family and really anyone who might listen about our little podcast, because we don't really advertise to get the word out, and we'd appreciate more people coming in and listening, because maybe that'll help us eventually cover all of the costs of hosting this show. Yeah. We're so close, by the way. We're at $30 per month right now. If we can get up to $40, then that will cover the costs of hosting the show. And then at the next tier, I think we can start using some of the money to upgrade our recording equipment and sound extra nice for all of you. And that
maybe
would be
even eventually be on video. Who knows?
Maybe. But on that note, flippity dippity.
Flippity dippity.